Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I wanted to rank celebrity horror books that I've read over the past month, talk about them, the pros and cons, how I feel about each one, and then at the end rank them. I thought this would be a fun video to do for October, and I wanted to see what celebrity spooky books were all about, so here we are. Just a quick disclaimer, if I don't like a book or if it's not for me, it doesn't mean that it's the worst book ever or that you shouldn't read it. These are just my opinions. Also, I don't want anyone thinking that just because I don't like a book that I'm, I don't know, talking badly about someone's art. I know books take a lot of work to write, so I would never want to do that, but I also want to be honest about how I feel about these books. So let's just get into it. First, I'll introduce you to the books that I read, and then I will leave timestamps down below in case you want to jump around and watch a specific part of one book. So the first book that I read was this guy right here. This is Supermarket by Logic, aka Bobby Hall. By the way, these are all in the realm of spooky. This one happens to be a thriller. The next one that I read was this guy right here. This is Elixir by Hilary Duff. This one's a YA paranormal, supernatural / romance type story. The next book I read was this guy right here. This is called The Story of Lex and Livia, Rebel, City of Indra, and this is by Kendall and Kylie Jenner. This is a dystopian kind of YA novel. And then the last one I read was Tim Burton's The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories. And this is more, Tim Burton's all you need to know, and I'm sure you can picture what this book is about. First, I'm going to start in the order that I read them, talk about them that way, and then at the end, we'll rank them. So let's get started. I'm a little bit nervous about this. So first off, Supermarket by Logic, Bobby Hall. Full disclosure, I am a huge Logic fan, and so I bought this book even before I decided to do this video. I wanted to support him, I wanted to read it, and I honestly thought I was going to love it. I thought that there would be really good one-liners in there. He's a rapper, in case you guys didn't know, I'm sure you do. So I picked it up and I was like, let's see if literally this shit is literary. But I really do love Logic, and I really wanted to see what the book was about, and I read it, and I gotta say, I was really disappointed. I have pros and cons for each book, but I was pretty disappointed in how this one turned out. So as far as the plot goes, I can't give too much away. It's one of those books where if I tell you what it is, then I give everything away. I'm not going to be giving like huge spoilers on any of these books. I want you guys to be able to feel free to read them yourself if you feel so inclined. But this is basically about a young boy named Flynn. He has recently moved out of his mom's house. He got a job at a supermarket and he's trying to write a book. The back just says he finds more in the aisles than he thought was imaginable, something like that. That's kind of where I have to leave it, and I know it's a very vague plot. So the story begins kind of like in medias res, in the middle of the action. We find that somebody has harmed somebody else, and then it picks back up kind of before everything leading up to that point. That's the layout of the story. Let's start with the positives, because there are some things I really liked about this book. I thought that this was just a really innovative way to find the next chapter. So right here it ends a chapter and it says, man, can we just skip to Monday already? And then the chapter begins and it says Monday already. And he does this a few times in the book, and I just think this is so creative and fun, and I really enjoyed that part of the book. Another thing I really enjoyed about this is that there are some scenes that seem random, but everything does come back around and loop together. I shouldn't say everything. A lot of things do come around and loop back together, the major plot points, I should say. So if a scene seems like it's random or that it wouldn't make sense or connect to anything, it usually does come around in some form and kind of tie together. So I did really like that. I could see how much work went into this book. Another thing, it's inspiring. It's a Logic book. Of course it's inspiring. Just like his music, just like him, that's why I love him and respect him and appreciate him so much. He's a fantastic artist and such an inspirational human. And there is a lot of that in this book. We will touch a little bit more on why this is both a pro and a con in a minute. But as somebody who's working on a piece of literature myself, it was really inspiring reading this book. There are some points that are like, you just gotta get this book done, you just gotta do it. It's inspiring, just like everything that Logic does is. So I really liked that about it. About halfway through, I wasn't sure how I felt about the book, and even at the end, I wasn't sure how I felt about like the plot, but the very, very last line in the book I thought was a really great ending for the story. I thought it was a pretty genius way of ending the book, to be honest. I also liked the cover. The cover makes sense to the book, but I can't give too much away about that either. And then let me talk about the thing that I loved, love very last, because I just think it's a nice way to kind of like end the review. But let's get into the things that I had a bit of an issue with. So first, the dialogue. The dialogue is so stilted. It's so unnatural. It's so hard to read. It takes you out of the story because nobody talks the way that this book portrays dialogue. And as far as the advice goes, the con to this is that I feel like the character of Flynn and Logic as a person get a little bit mixed in this novel, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously he probably based a lot of this character on him, given the ending and his own personal experiences and things like that. However, if it doesn't fit the character, then it's just out of place. And so, for example, there's 2 pages in here where Flynn just started working at this grocery store. He's like just beginning his life. He's a 20-something-year-old kid. And there's 2 pages where he just rambles on and on about how you can do anything you want, and I'm always telling people that, and we have conversations all the time, and it seemed very much so like Logic speaking. And I thought, okay, maybe that's how this character is, and maybe he will continue to have these types of conversations. Like maybe that's part of this character. It absolutely wasn't. In fact, the more the book goes along, kind of the less confident he gets, it seems, and more to his like breaking point. Those like rambling, logic, inspirational advice, although fun to read, didn't really have anything to do with character and felt very out of place. It felt more like Logic speaking than the character speaking. So I think it was both a pro and a con in this book. There were some things in here that I wish were maybe researched a little bit better. I can't, again, give a lot away because it would ruin the plot of the book, but I do feel like there was maybe some misinformation in here, and I don't think that at all was his intention. So I just think a little bit more research and like finesse with the touchy parts of this book would have benefited the work a lot. Here's something that I think is a big point. So probably one of my big issues in here is the hints that are dropped throughout are pretty obvious in themselves. I mean, I don't think that it's a very deep analytical book that you have to read between the lines to figure things out. I think it's fairly obvious what's going on, and it's one of those books where, you know, for example, when you're watching a horror movie and the director needs you to know that 2 people are in the house, so it zooms in on 2 pairs of shoes for 5 minutes, and you're like, I'm not stupid. That's how I kind of felt like with this book. He was just kind of like, oh, you see? Do you see this? Do you get it? And I'm like, yes, we get it. And I think that I appreciate books more, even if I miss things, for authors that give me that leeway and expect their readers to be intelligent enough to figure out the plot without being told everything. So even if you miss things, I think it's still better to not explicitly state the things that you're planting the seeds for. So I said it maybe gives too much away instead of letting the reader figure it out. It spells it out for you. There are also some issues with tense inconsistencies in here, and for example, in dialogue, he says ha ha ha, like instead of like Flynn laughs a lot. I don't know. He types out ha ha ha. There are also points in the plot that are very unbelievable, so I feel like going into this you definitely have to have some suspension of disbelief to just go along with it and be like, okay, this is what we're going with, this is what's happening. However, I do appreciate that the narrator is an unreliable narrator in some senses, and I do appreciate that, and I think that with more practice, because that's a hard thing to do, is take on an unreliable narrator in your very first novel. But I think with time and practice, things like the inconsistency in tenses could be played with a lot more if there was more like mastering of the language in this book. It does feel a little bit all over the place, but it kind of does work for the character and what the plot turns out being. Really quickly, I just wanted to say that the comments in here that were more of a metaphor for Logic's own turmoil with things like depression and anxiety, I think were the strongest parts of the books. They were the ones that were most convincing to me, that hit close to home, were the most real. And everything else on top of it was just kind of superficial. It didn't make like an engaging story, but I think that there's something in here, and I am really interested to see if he does work and write another book. I would absolutely pick it up and read it, because if this is his first book, there's only up from here. Not meaning that this is the worst book ever written, but just this isn't his best work. It's not the greatest novel, but I think that there is something in here. And then the very last thing that I want to talk about is the acknowledgments. Now, this kind of changed how I felt about the book. Now, do I think you should have to read the acknowledgments in a story to appreciate the novel? No. I mean, the story should stand on its own. However, I did want to read you a few things in here because some of this is really cool. So the very first paragraph says, "First and foremost, I'd like to thank my best friend Christian. After a week of binge reading novels for the first time in my life in my mid-20s, I sat up and said, I'm gonna write a book. To which Christian replied, you can't write a fucking book just because you've been reading them. It was all the motivation I needed." That is fucking inspirational. That is so cool that that is the way that his mind thinks. And I think that's just a testament to how far he's come as an artist and, you know, how many people love and respect his work. I also wanted to read this. I want to thank Stuart Roberts for giving a kid who didn't even graduate high school a book deal. He did not even graduate high school. He read his first book in his mid-20s and he wrote this. I mean, that's pretty fucking impressive. As somebody who has been writing their own short stories since 3rd grade, who has a bachelor's degree in creative writing, writing is my life. To be able to see somebody pick up a book and be like, I'm gonna do this, that's fucking inspirational. That's impressive. I think that's pretty awesome that he took the chance on himself and he had a lot of people that stand behind him and he wrote this. I am glad that I bought it and supported him. I'm glad that I read it. But I do think that if Logic really wanted to, you know, have a future in writing, I think that if he went on his Goodreads and read some of the reviews, a lot of them are just good constructive criticism. And I think if he takes that well and really works on his craft, I think that he could be a good writer. So that is my review of Supermarket. Hats off to him. I think that's awesome. Also, a lot of these other writers use other writers to help them write the book. This was all Logic. I mean, sure, he had editors and people to help him and things like that, but like he sat down and did the writing. So my question to you is, before we move on, would you rather a book like this that maybe isn't written perfectly, but is solely the thoughts of the person writing it that you admire, like a celebrity like Logic, or would you rather it be a well-crafted story with, you know, a celebrity who has a writer on board to kind of help them, and in that sense you don't know how much each person wrote and took on, you know what I mean? Let me know your thoughts on that. So let's move on to the second one. Elixir by Hilary Duff. This is a paranormal romance YA novel. It's about a young girl named, fuck, I forget her name, Clea. She is a photojournalist. Her father was really big on, he was like a scientist, and he was after finding the elixir of life, which gives you, maybe it doesn't like make you live forever. The book explains it better, you'll have to read it. But he was after that and he disappeared. So she's always trying to figure out, you know, what happened to him, but she feels like she's kind of run into a wall here. She ends up taking a trip with her friend and a mysterious man shows up in all her photos. Then she finds her soulmate. So it is a book about soulmates and reincarnation and all sorts of things. It is a lot more than just your typical love story. First of all, I read this when I was younger, when I was a young adult, and I loved this book. I really did. And so I was interested to read it again as a woman in her 30s to see how I felt about it. And although my feelings have changed, I still love this book. I think it's fun. I mean, after I read it, I was like, I think I'm gonna go read the second one too, because I do have the second one from when I was younger as well. I enjoyed the hell out of this book. There are little things like this iris here is the same iris that she has on a charm. It's also the same iris that shows up in the different stories. It's also on the pages. The first chapter really sets up the entire book for you. And so she basically has a friend named Ben who's helping her, and then she also has her soulmate. So there's also a lot of chemistry between her and her friend Ben. And I remember when I was younger, I was like, date Ben, forget your soulmate. Even back then, I didn't even care about the soulmate thing. And as I grew up, I'm like, oh, she's kind of an asshole to Ben. Hopefully Ben finds someone better. So in that sense, I did read things a little differently. And I still didn't particularly like the parts with the soulmate. It's very much so romanticizing love in a way that's bigger than life kind of thing. I'm not a fan of that. I don't mind romance being like the background of my stories, but when it's that kind of like we're meant to be together, fictional stuff, I'm just not a fan of. However, I did like the parts that were grounded in reality. So the parts where her and Ben are finding clues to try to figure out where her father is, they're following coordinates, they're looking here and there. I really did like those parts of the story. And even the parts with the soulmates and the reincarnation and the past lives and all this, I found it very interesting. It really is a fun book, and I think worth the read. I will say, I did read a few comments and people said it adds nothing new to the genre. Now, I do not read YA supernatural fiction, nor have I ever, so maybe that is the case. Maybe this book doesn't add anything to the genre, but for me, because it was the first book that I read from that category, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a well-written story. I think it's cute. Honestly, I think that if you're gonna write a book and you're a celebrity, I mean, this is good. I don't know how much work she put into it. I have no idea how much work the writer that she used put into it, but it's a good story. That's what I'll say about that one. So next up, the third book that I read here. Okay, so the next book is this one. This is The Story of Lex and Livia, Rebel City of Indra, and this is by Kendall and Kylie Jenner. And this one actually has two other writers who helped them craft this novel. Okay, where do I start with this? I guess the plot. So it's like a dystopian story of Lex and Livia. And basically one of them, so there's a city of Indra, and then there's the people that live below ground, and the lower you get, the worse off you are, the worse people see you, the less resources you have, things like that. However, I don't know if people in the city live outside of the city or inside buildings. I'm still not 100% sure on that. But then there are islands that float above, and on those islands are heiresses, like AIR, which I thought was actually pretty clever. And so one of the girls is an heiress who lives on the island, Livia, I think, and then the other girl is an orphan from the underground, Lex. And so we follow their two stories throughout their lives up until the point that they meet and find out that perhaps it was more like destiny that they came together. This one I'm going to talk about the cons first. So first of all, it was a mixture of past and present tense. Halfway through the book, we switched to present tense. Now, present tense works a lot of the time, and this is also just my personal preference. I think present tense works specifically for certain types of books. For example, whodunits, fantastic in present tense. And I think the reason for that is because we don't get to know the characters, they're always holding something back for us, we're in the middle of the action with them, and we don't find out things until they do. So present tense works in that situation. However, with a dystopian book, that's world building, that you're supposed to build an entire world, for me, it just falls short. Like, there just was not enough description of the world for it to feel like a good dystopian novel. I also felt like the characters were really flat, and I also think that this maybe was because of the use of present tense, because although we do get to know them in the past, we don't really get to see many like good interactions, and we do get their thoughts because it's written in first person, and it alternates between the two girls. There's just so much left to be desired in that sense, and I think that maybe the present tense was to blame here a bit, and that is my personal preference. A lot of times if a book is in present tense, I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna feel about this. It was just hard to feel like I was in the world when I didn't really get a great deal of information about the world I was in, other than like little bits here and there. It's also a weird mixture of past and present, which I guess is like a typical dystopian. However, with this dystopian specifically, it's a very weird mixture of modern day, honestly, and then also very past ideologies. Like, Livia goes to these etiquette classes where she's basically told to shut her mouth, that she's more powerful with a man by her side. She has to wear a ball gown and she has to look pretty, and that's kind of all that matters. It feels modern day because instead of grass, there's synth grass. And instead of a gun, there's a blaster. And you know what I mean? So like most of the things you just figure out in context, and there aren't a crazy amount of explanations of like futuristic things. It's just like, oh, instead of a helicopter or some sort of flying device, it's called this. So that's what I mean by I felt like the world building was a little bit lackluster. The girls are also very much so, how do I put this in terms that's not as bitchy, but also this is what they are. They're like, I'm not like anyone else. Other girls like to needlepoint. I like to play with swords. That's basically all they say the whole time. They don't even try to relate to other people. They just kind of discredit everyone, and then they're confused why other people don't like them. And it's like, because you're rude to everyone. What do you mean? Because you think you're better than everyone. So in that way, the characters are kind of flat for me, and I honestly just didn't care what happened to any of the characters. The relationships are weird, and how people like fall for each other is very odd, but I can't get into that because I don't want to give too much away. There's also some just odd comments in here. This was published in 2014. Now, I don't know how old these girls are, but they can't be older than like early to mid 20s. So probably in 2014 they were like teens, which means their audience was probably teens, which is why this is like a young adult story. So to have that be your audience and then have these comments just made me feel bleh. So this is a comment that is told to the heiress when she is 7. Your beauty is far superior to every last one of them. For that alone, they will want to be your friend. And this idea of just like, you're special, you're pretty, you're different is just drilled into this entire thing. It's just kind of weird. You have amazing eyes like I've never seen to a little girl. And then it says, what if they take me away? And they said, they won't, I promise, because you're special. And then there's this one, therefore creating a human specimen with the most preferential makeup. What is a human specimen with the most preferential makeup? And he said, you are, my love. These are weird comments to talk about young girls. And then I was thinking like, okay, maybe this is a comment on beauty standards in our own society. And I thought later on in the book, they must disprove that. Like it's not just all about looks. And maybe that does come into play at some point in the second book, because there is a second one to this. But in this book, it really is just like, you're pretty and you get anything you want because you're pretty and unique. And I just have a weird feeling about that message being passed on. And maybe I'm reading into it. Here's another fucking weird comment, okay? This is when one girl meets the other girl and she says, I'm rather sure she has never undergone an alteration, though on first glance, I did suspect a chest enhancement. Okay, their appearance is hardly spoken about besides other people being like, you're so pretty, you're so unique. We know they have dark hair and one of them has different colored eyes. That's kind of it. We don't really get any other description. So this comment being thrown in here and then never brought up again is just weird. Like, why are you talking about her tits? It's odd. And I know it probably seems like I'm nitpicking, but this was like pretty true to the story. Then there's this comment, and this really rubbed me the wrong way. It says, geneticists specialize in enhancements, dimple insertion, skin replenishment, skeletal adjustments, nothing that changes the world, just your appearance. Governess begged me to get a chest alteration. I refused again and again. I'm not going to say anything about it, but I will just leave that there. And then last up, before I talk about the things that I liked, I just want to say that I didn't mind the second half of the story if the characters were a little bit more well built and the world was a little bit built up for me. I think I would have maybe enjoyed it. I thought that the story was weird. It's weird what ends up happening, and I don't really fully comprehend. I wish I could just tell you what happens. If you guys want me to do another video where I just tell you everything, let me know. But I did find it weird, the ending of the plot and stuff. But my main issue was that the first half of the book was about the girls being raised, which I understand. We have to see that they were raised separately. We get to know them on an individual basis before we bring them together. Totally understand that. Didn't need to be half the book. Why am I reading 50 pages of this girl in an etiquette class where she's spinning in circles? And I was like, this has to come around sometime later. Those characters aren't even brought up again. Maybe they pop up in the second one, I don't know. But it just seemed like such a waste of space. I understand we need to know these characters, but watching her spin on a platform and complain about it in her head isn't really giving me much. So the book really starts halfway through the novel at her ball. If we just cut to there, honestly, and had a few snippets of the past, I think I would have probably enjoyed this much better. The orphanage stuff was a little bit more entertaining to see her strife and what she went through and things like that, but I still think that could have been cut down too. My husband came out and looked at me while I was reading the book, and he just stares at me. I'm like, what? He's like, I've never seen you so sad reading a book before. Because the first 100 or 200 pages were pretty tough to get through. What I liked. So there wasn't a lot, like I said, of that futuristic type stuff. However, there was one thing that was explained that was a machine that displayed sound through paint. And I thought that was really cool and really creative, and I had never read anything like that before. And they describe how screams look different than laughter, and I thought that was really neat. And if it leaned more heavily into the futuristic world, I mean, that's really cool. It probably would have impressed me a little bit more. Another good thing that I liked was they have these wrist slots where they put in archives that are past memories or make-believes, and they're basically memories or things that you can like actually go through. And my favorite part of them was that there are things called shadow people, and they're people that have gone against the city of Indra. And so they're required to live in these archives for the rest of time, and they just kind of like lurk in the background. I thought that was cool, and I would have liked to get a little bit more information on that. Other than that, there was some creepy stuff in the beginnings. Not creepy, but like horror, blood and guts kind of stuff. And also in Elixir too. Really enjoyed those parts in both of these books that, you know, it did incorporate some of that horror element in there, being that they're like dystopian or supernatural novels. Elixir supernatural, not this one. But all in all, I was pretty disappointed by this one. I thought that it was kind of a vapid read, to be honest. Like the characters were pretty vapid, and the world just wasn't really built up in the way that I expected. However, that being said, again, I think that it's cool that anybody who has an idea for a novel can go and get it done, especially when they're kids. Like they were kids when they did this, teens or I don't know, early 20s or what have you. So I still think that's really cool. As I said, somebody who literature is my absolute life, I think that that's really awesome, and I fully support people going into endeavors of writing books if they feel like that's the next step in their life. So I think that that's awesome. Anybody who feels like writing a book should. Obviously, I wish that I liked this better, but just because it wasn't a book for me doesn't mean that other people won't like it. So that is that. Next up, I'm very happy about this one. This one is Tim Burton's The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories. This book is so cute. It's so fun. There are very Tim Burton-esque drawings in here. This one's called The Boy with Nails in His Eyes. So, okay, let me be clear. These aren't really for kids, but it does have like that Shel Silverstein, just magical element to it that makes you feel like you're reading a book as a kid. Although some of the topics definitely not children appropriate, but some are. Some are just cute poems. Some drawings are fun, some drawings are a little bit creepier, but there are topics like infidelity and eating your own child. We'll get to that in a second. And then he also uses anthropomorphic creatures to be the main characters in his stories, like a match boy or a brie boy, brie like cheese, or a voodoo doll girl. And so I think that's a lot of fun. There are some that are just silly and, you know, quick 1 or 2 liners, and then there are others that have more morals around them or tell more of a full story. And if you don't mind, I would like to read to you 2 of my favorites. The first one is the one of Oyster Boy. So basically what happens is a family has a child, a man and a woman have a child, and it's an oyster. The man can no longer perform in bed. So this is a quote from it. It says, "The doctor diagnosed, 'I can't be quite sure, but the cause of the problem may also be the cure. They say oysters improve your sexual powers. Perhaps eating your son would help you do it for hours.'" And so they eat their son. It's kind of a fucked up story, but just, I read it and I was like, next one I wanted to read is this. It's called Anchor Baby. It's this woman who lives in the ocean, and she wants to date one of the guys that lives on land, and she gets this brilliant idea because they can't be together, and she's like, "Oh, we'll just have a baby. That way he's stuck with me." And then they give birth to this anchor, and its umbilical cord is a chain. There's this right here. Here's the picture of it, because the man left, and she was alone with her gray baby anchor, who got so oppressive it eventually sank her. I mean, there's so much to analyze in this short little poem. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Like I said, some are silly, some have a little bit more meaning. I just think that they're so fun. There's also this one where it was a girl who won a staring contest, and the end said, "And she gave her eyes a well-deserved rest," and she takes her eyeballs out of her eyes and lets them chill on the beach for a vacation. It's just so Tim Burton. I loved this. I thought this was so much fun. And then the inside just says that Tim Burton gives birth to a cast of gruesomely sympathetic characters, misunderstood outcasts who struggle to find love and belonging in this cruel, cruel world. And then it says, here's a quote from the New York Times. It says that his stories convey the pain of an adolescent outsider. Like Tim Burton's movies, the work manages to be both childlike and sophisticated, blending the innocent with the macabre. And that is a perfect way to describe this book. So now, really quickly, let's rank them for you. My favorite book Oh, should I do least favorite to my most favorite? Okay, least favorite, this one. This one was my least favorite. It left a lot to be desired. Maybe the second one's better, I don't know. Rebel City of Indra came in last place. Supermarket came in second to last place for me. Again, I think that he just needs to work on his craft, and I think that he could develop a good novel. I still support him and I still love him as an artist, so I'm excited that I read this. I'm glad I gave it a try, but those were my opinions on that guy. In second place, Elixir, Hilary Duff. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the shit out of this book. I thought it was cute. I'm honestly gonna read the second one probably sometime later on in this year. I thought that this was a fun novel and I really did enjoy reading it. I got sucked in. Number 1 place, The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories by Tim Burton. This just reminded me of childhood. It reminded me of watching A Nightmare Before Christmas and having nightmares when I was a kid. It just reminded me of, yeah, like a mixture of whimsical child stories with like very macabre, dark twists and turns. A fantastic book. So those are, oh, and then my only con for that one was that it just was short. I would have liked a lot more of his cute little poems and illustrations. So there you have it. That is my reading and ranking and reviewing of these celebrity spooky stories for Halloween. Let me know what you think about them. Let me know which ones you will read, which ones you won't read, which ones you have read, which ones sound interesting. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys!